You're making this harder than it needs to be, Darren said, not even looking up from his phone as HR read off my termination. The woman next to him, clipboard, nervous eyes, clearly uncomfortable, paused, waiting for me to react. I didn't. I simply slid my Arcadium badge across the polished table, stood, and walked to the door. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. But something in Darren's smug grin made me pause. My phone buzzed as I reached for the handle. Unknown number, I answered. A calm voice said, "We heard you're available. We'd like to offer you double and a leadership seat." I pressed speaker. Let the room hear it. Darren laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Right. Who would poach you?" The office door creaked open. His father walked in. Early, silent, he heard the last line, and he didn't laugh. If you're still listening, this is the part where you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people don't, but it helps more than you know. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Now rewind the clock. 18 years, no alarms, no drama, no scandals, just uptime, compliance, and bulletproof systems delivery across a dozen multi-tiered defense frameworks. I didn't advertise my wins. I archived them. I kept contractors from breaching firewalls, rewrote API bridges mid-deployment without a single second of service loss, and carried the encryption redesign across 3 administrations without a single leak. I was the architect Arcadium didn't need to see, because my work meant they never saw the fires that never happened. But then came Darren Hale, the kind of executive whose resume reads like a PowerPoint got drunk. Phrases like agile visioneering and integrated disruption flew out of his mouth like confetti at a failed TED Talk. He walked into meetings with a ring light in his briefcase and spent half his first week trying to rename departments after Greek gods. He tried to brand my division as Project Prometheus. I told him flatly we weren't an Instagram account. He didn't like that. He especially didn't like being corrected, especially not by a woman who didn't smile at his metaphors. It started with soft nudges. "We'd love to streamline your workflow," he said, while circling my team's systems with some flashy vendor he found on LinkedIn. Then came the invitations to alignment meetings with people who couldn't spell AES encryption, let alone audit it. And then came the report. Darren's efficiency mandate was a deck of buzzwords wrapped in a spreadsheet, and it recommended replacing legacy skill holders with agile vendor augmentation. I wasn't just named, I was flagged as risk of institutional knowledge bottleneck. His exact phrasing, single point of failure risk, mitigate via talent refresh. They took my name off the system architecture flowcharts, but they forgot Clause 12C. It was buried in our Defense Alignment Charter, last reviewed 3 years ago, and still legally binding. It wasn't just legalese, it was personal. That clause named me specifically as non-substitutable personnel on all systems tied to Tier 4 DefenseNet integrations. Darren skimmed it once, smirked, said, "We're not dropping nukes, we're syncing data. They'll adapt." The CFO stayed quiet. The general counsel adjusted his glasses like he'd just remembered something he should have said out loud. The CEO was still overseas. And I started documenting every override request, every unauthorized vendor packet Darren tried to push through, every time he blocked access to my internal audit dashboards. I didn't argue. I archived. Let the record show. I never raised my voice. I just raised the stakes. Because you don't spend 18 years building a fortress only to hand it over to a trust fund with a Slack addiction. You build it with traps, with keys only you can hold, with systems that don't just break when you're gone, they wait. And when they realize you're not coming back, they don't scream. They log the failure, timestamp it, and they hold. The first time Darren said legacy brain holders out loud in a meeting, I watched the head of compliance drop her pen. No one called him on it. Not the CFO, who'd started wearing noise-canceling headphones to focus. Not the HR director, who blinked like someone had just slapped her with a fish. And definitely not the general counsel, who suddenly needed to check something in his notes every time Darren opened his mouth. I stayed still. Lean vendor models, Darren continued, pacing in front of a slideshow with a title that looked like it belonged on a crypto scam landing page. Deconstruct, optimize, transcend. He talked about cost centers and operational drag like we were a broken shopping cart. These long-tenured roles, he said, they're friction, and friction is inefficiency. He pointed to my name, bold, red, center slide. Key person dependency, unacceptable. I didn't flinch. I waited until the room emptied, then approached him. You're pushing vendors into black box access on systems wrapped in federal custodial clauses. You touch the wrong module and you'll trigger an audit flag you can't scrub. He smirked like a man who thought encryption was a metaphor. We're not dropping nukes, we're syncing data. I tapped the corner of his printout. Clause 12C, Security Charter, signed by the DoD, the Air Force, and 3 agencies you've never heard of. I'm not just on the system. I am the system. You remove me without a custodial transition, and you invalidate the entire framework. He leaned back, shrugged. It's just red tape. They'll adapt. They won't, I said, because the clause wasn't written for their convenience. It was written to prevent you. He laughed, literally laughed, then motioned toward the glass wall. You've got a great reputation, but the world's changing. I've got 6 offers from vendor firms who can do what you do, with half the overhead. Think about it. Wouldn't you rather be agile? Agile, the word they slap on fire before lighting the match. That's when I knew this wasn't a debate. It was a countdown. Because Darren didn't care about systems. He cared about spreadsheets, about ROI slides with emojis, about being the guy who cleaned house before the next board review. And I was the house. Behind closed doors, I started noticing patterns. Vendor packets getting back-end access requests, ones I hadn't cleared. System logs showing overnight pings from uncredentialed IPs. One even bounced off our secure staging server before I firewalled it manually. I flagged the events. Emailed Darren. No reply. I went to legal. Brought a print out of the compliance header and my custodial clause. The general counsel took it slowly. Didn't look up for nearly a minute. Did he authorize this push? I don't know, I said, but it wasn't routed through protocol. And if they try to push changes on Tier 4 without my authorization, it's a federal breach. You know that. He nodded once, then sighed. The CEO's still overseas. No coverage for another week. Convenient. I walked out of that room and began the second phase of what I'd always hoped I'd never need. I didn't make noise. I made copies. I archived every credential timestamp, every backdoor Darren's people tried to slide open. I uploaded them into the old continuity vaults I built back when Arcadium still cared about resilience. And I checked the clause again. 12C. In the event of termination, reassignment, or incapacitation of the named systems architect, transition is subject to a minimum 30-day custodial transfer period. Modifications, vendor access, or system pivots during this window are prohibited and legally void under federal integration policy. That clause had my name next to it. Not a title. My name. They signed it years ago thinking they'd never need to enforce it, and now they were betting I wouldn't. Darren thought contracts were paper. I knew they were weapons. And this one was loaded. The email came at 2:11 p.m., subject line, Operational Alignment, 4 p.m. No agenda, just a location, Conference 4C, and the meeting was marked mandatory. I knew. Everyone who's been through a few cycles knows. The fake neutral subject lines, the late-day scheduling, the way people stop making eye contact when you walk past. HR was always a video feed now, sanitized and remote, so they didn't have to see what happened when they read off the scripts. I didn't pack up. I didn't forward my emails. I didn't need to. At 3:59, I walked in. Darren was already sitting there, grinning like he'd just won something in a cereal box. He had the manila folder open in front of him, flanked by a legal rep who couldn't even look me in the eye, and an HR manager dialed in from wherever they hide these days. Darren launched in before I even sat down. We're restructuring to better align with shareholder value. Effective immediately, your role is eliminated. The HR woman piped in with her required paragraph. Severance offer, return of equipment, Cobra packet. I didn't hear it. I didn't need to. I slid my Arcadium badge across the table like it was a poker chip, stood up, and turned toward the door. No argument, no speech, no threats, just silence. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. Unknown number, I answered instinctively. A calm voice. We heard you're available. We'd like to offer you double and a leadership seat. I paused for half a beat, just long enough, then pressed speaker. The voice continued. Full technical authority, your team, your timeline. We're ready whenever you are. Darren's grin twitched. He let out a short, confused laugh, like he was trying to play it cool but couldn't quite wrap his head around the fact that someone else had beaten him to the punch. Right, he snorted. Who even are you talking to? Your cousin? Let me guess. Startup with a GoDaddy domain? That's when the door opened, and his father walked in. Lawrence Hale. CEO of Arcadium for over 30 years, back from his overseas trip 3 days early, apparently. He didn't speak, didn't ask what was going on. He just stood there, long enough to hear the voice on the phone say, "We're prepared to move quickly. We understand the clause. We already have legal on standby." And Lawrence's face drained of color. Darren sat there blinking, like someone had unplugged him, still holding the manila folder, still thinking he was in control. He wasn't. He'd just fired the only person keeping the entire Tier 4 infrastructure federally compliant, and handed her, in real time, to Arcadium's biggest competitor. And I hadn't said a word, because there was nothing left to say. They always think it's about titles. They forget it's about keys. Keys I wrote, keys I held, keys that were now leaving the building. And they didn't even ask for the code. The next morning, while Darren was probably still practicing his TED Talk smile in the bathroom mirror, legal was already in full meltdown mode. At 7:04 a.m., the Defense Alignment portal lit up with a formal status change. Authorized architect removed. Immediately below it, custodial transition not initiated. And at the bottom, blinking in all caps, escalation pending. They'd triggered the clause. Clause 12C wasn't a footnote. It wasn't hidden. It was signed, sealed, and filed under 3 federal oversight bodies, all of which required active, name-bound custodianship for system integrity. Arcadium thought it was a formality. They forgot I'd helped write it. Every credentialed vendor pipeline, from zero trust onboarding to encrypted endpoint assignment, ran through my personal security signature. Every onboarding access token was embedded with a conditional approval tag that would auto-expire if my clearance was revoked without formal succession protocol. And succession had to be witnessed, co-signed, logged with federal timestamping, 30 days minimum. They had none of it. By 9:13 a.m., legal was huddled in a war room. Darren tried to bluff through the first call, insisting to one of our Tier 2 contractors that everything's fine. The contractor replied with a screenshot. Access request denied. No active authorizer on file. I heard later that Darren looked confused, then angry, then demanded it. Just patch it. They tried. But the system wasn't broken. It was fortified. Because every protocol I designed wasn't just for hackers or industrial sabotage, it was for exactly this kind of internal stupidity. I'd warned them for years. Access isn't ownership. And now they were locked out of their own kingdom, with vendors piling up on the outside, deadlines evaporating, and the Pentagon compliance tracker sending automated warnings every 2 hours. One of my former engineers texted me a screenshot from our staging dashboard. Frozen in red, pulsing at the header. Architect verification void, compliance countdown, 71 hours. He just wrote, "Holy T." Meanwhile, the DoD sent a courtesy ping. Not a formal inquiry, not yet. Just a line in the log. Unscheduled architecture removal detected. Confirm continuity status. Those notifications didn't go to Darren. They went to Lawrence Hale. Directly. CEO level routing. Because when I'd built the system, I wrote a tiny clause that redirected critical continuity alerts in case of protocol breach. It wasn't sneaky. It was compliant. Just inconvenient for anyone who tried to play chess without reading the rulebook. By noon, panic set in. Someone in finance discovered that our primary vendor accounts had hit a hold. Their integration milestones were tied to time-stamped access approvals. Without those approvals, payment releases were suspended, escrow held, contracts breached. Because everything had been built to prevent turnover without transparency, and they turned me over like I was a printer cartridge. The CIO tried escalating internally, contacted the staging vault admin to reset access logs, except I was the vault admin, and the backup? Encrypted under a dual auth key system. One key belonged to the compliance director, still on site. The other? Me. They didn't have it. They didn't even know where to start looking. Because for 18 years, I'd been the one keeping the wheels turning, and no one had ever bothered to ask how the engine ran. Now they were standing on the side of the road, staring at the hood, wondering why none of their new drivers had the keys. And in Washington, the escalation flag had moved from yellow to orange. The countdown had begun. By 8:30 the next morning, Darren was storming through the second floor like a man chasing a fire he couldn't see. The problem wasn't that something had broken. The problem was that nothing was moving, no vendor credentials processed, no staging environment synced, no system handoffs verified, and not a single override request got through. "Restore access immediately," he snapped at IT. Just force it. 3 engineers stared back at him, silent. One finally spoke. We can't. Why not? Darren barked. You people built this. No, the lead said. She built it. They tried to explain, calmly at first, that the entire defense-side architecture operated on biometric dual auth, mine and the compliance director's. That's how it was designed. 2-person integrity control enforced through embedded logic layers that couldn't be bypassed without triggering escalation alerts on the federal side. And the second half of the key, it was tethered to a conditional release phrase I had hard-coded into the secure admin vault. Trigger only upon substitution without formal transfer. Those words weren't decorative. They were literal. Unless a formal custodial transfer process had been initiated and co-signed, my key remained locked. And without that key, all vendor-side system access froze by design. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted resilience. Because contracts built on human trust needed to anticipate human arrogance. And here it was. Darren tried to reassign the credentials to a vendor lead from Acceleron Systems, someone he'd clearly been prepping behind the scenes. The credentialing engine flagged it immediately. Unauthorized substitution. Logged. Rejected. Any further attempts, the system warned, would notify the DoD directly. He backed off. For now. By midday, legal huddled again. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. They'd already found the secure admin note I'd left in the vault before leaving, a clean documentation string, time-stamped and digitally notarized, outlining the full lockout protocol. It read, System Transition Protocol, pending Clause 12C initiation. No active custodial process detected. All access freeze mechanisms are now live. Do not attempt override without federal liaison co-presence. Signed, me. Dated 45 minutes after my termination. I'd timed it deliberately. Darren still didn't understand why this wasn't fixable. He kept looking for shortcuts, thought it could just spoof a biometric input or backdoor the credentialing chain. They couldn't, because the architecture wasn't designed to be inherited. It was designed to be earned. Every trap they tripped now had a paper trail, federal audit ready. I didn't need to accuse anyone of mishandling protocol. The system did that for me, quietly, relentlessly. By 3 p.m., 3 vendor onboarding projects had stalled completely. Acceleron, Fortivox, and Argus Tech, all on 30-day milestone contracts. Missed delivery meant penalty clauses. Penalty clauses meant breach reports. And breach reports triggered investor flags. Operations slowed to a crawl. The worst part? They still didn't know how many more landmines I'd left behind. Because this wasn't sabotage, it was structure. I had built Arcadium's Tier 4 framework for maximum compliance integrity. Every line of code, every access route, every signing protocol, meant to withstand catastrophe. The catastrophe just happened to be them. And outside the building, far from their panic, I was already in talks with Halberd Systems. They knew exactly what Clause 12C meant. And they didn't want a backdoor. They wanted the architect. The room was packed, but silent. 10 executives, 3 lawyers, 1 external compliance auditor, and a visibly unwell Darren Hale seated near the end of the table like a man trying to become invisible inside his suit. The CEO, Lawrence Hale, stood at the head with a printed copy of something he clearly hadn't read before that morning. His jaw clenched as legal stepped forward, hands trembling slightly as they turned on the projector and brought up the header, Clause 12C, Non-Substitutable Personnel Designation. No one breathed. The lead counsel cleared his throat. Clause 12C states, termination, reassignment, or incapacitation of named personnel without proper custodial transition invalidates system authorization. No architecture, compliance module, or vendor relay may be modified, licensed, or reassigned without either A, explicit written consent from the named personnel, or B, completion of a formal 30-day custodial transfer process. A beat passed. He continued. Arcadium initiated neither. He clicked to the next slide. My name was highlighted 3 times. Custodial key holder, A. Reyes System Architect of Record. A. Reyes Federal Clearance Holder. Tier 4 Core Stack, A. Reyes Lawrence turned toward Darren. You fired her, Darren stammered. She was blocking modernization. We had vendor partners ready to... She was the partner, Lawrence snapped. You fired the authorization. The general counsel interrupted. We can't even get the DoD to return our emails, because yesterday they submitted a meeting request. Lawrence blinked. To whom? The lawyer just looked at him. Her. They requested the meeting with her. Someone gasped. Another exec cursed under their breath. A compliance officer from D.C. who'd been flown in that morning leaned forward, tapping his iPad. As of 7:45 a.m., all active systems under the DefenseNet Tier 4 charter remain flagged as non-compliant due to unauthorized custodial breach. The timestamp on the breach matches your termination protocol, exact to the minute. He turned the screen so they could see it. Your system revoked its own credibility the second she walked out the door. The CIO tried to jump in, but the data is still intact. We can reissue credentials. No, the compliance officer said flatly. You can't. Why the hell not? Because under the federal charter, credentials issued during an unauthorized custodial breach are inadmissible. Any vendor working through you now is doing so on a framework that's considered tampered. Darren looked around, wild-eyed, desperate. That's insane. There has to be a workaround. There is, the officer said, folding his tablet. Talk to her. The room sank into silence, because they all knew what that meant. It wasn't about getting her back into the building. It was about what she represented on paper, in code, in law. I wasn't just a systems architect. I was the named linchpin in the only clause that mattered, the one they never read, the one they never thought I'd need, the one that now had a giant, glowing red outline in every federal compliance system across 4 agencies. Clause 12C wasn't obscure, wasn't buried, wasn't some footnote in a forgotten PDF. It was bolded, signed, federally filed. And until they met with me, until I either signed off or re-entered a custodial transition, Arcadium's entire defense platform was dead in the water, and no one in that room could fix it, because I wasn't a role. I was a keystone, and they'd pulled me out without checking what held the building up. By the end of the week, Darren had called me 3 times. No voicemails, no texts, just calls. Desperate ones, judging by the timestamps, one at 6:12 a.m., one at 9:47 p.m., and one at exactly 1:03 a.m. on a Thursday. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Every word he wanted to hear was now locked behind a clause he thought didn't matter. The news traveled fast. My name hit the industry circuit like a spark in dry grass. Halberd Systems, Arcadium's only real competitor in the Tier 4 space, reached out before I'd even updated my LinkedIn. I met their CEO for coffee in a glass-walled corner office that overlooked a building still under construction. Appropriate, I thought. They were growing. They needed infrastructure, they needed certainty, they needed me. Their offer didn't come in a manila folder. It came with one sentence. Name your price. No ego, no pitch deck, just respect and a legal team already versed in 12C language. They'd read the clause. Twice. They knew exactly what it meant. Meanwhile, Arcadium was coming apart one silent thread at a time. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with that slow, yawning kind of failure that starts in the quiet corners and spreads into every hallway. Internal project leads started dusting off their resumes. 3 of my former engineers reached out privately, asking where I'd landed. 2 of them sent PDFs. I didn't promise anything. I didn't need to. They knew the score. Darren tried to fast-track alternative vendors. Legal blocked every attempt. Without my custodial signature, none of the architecture handoffs were valid. The compliance chain was broken. They were still running infrastructure, sure, but it was running unverified. The kind of exposed liability that makes defense clients twitch. And the Pentagon? Silent. No contract meetings, no updates, just unread emails in Darren's inbox, each one a silent warning with a federal header. Even Lawrence Hale had gone quiet. He knew the weight of silence, the sharp kind that cuts deeper than shouting. And now he was sitting in it, watching his son realize too late that leadership isn't about power. It's about authorship. And I was the author of everything they were still trying to salvage. I didn't post online, didn't comment on industry threads speculating about the unexpected transition at Arcadium. I didn't leak anything to press contacts I knew would love the scoop. I didn't have to, because my presence was still felt. In every denied access attempt, every stalled contract, every red warning flashing across their internal dashboards. It wasn't sabotage, it was absence. And absence has gravity. They could rebuild if they wanted, but not on the same ground. That ground now belonged to Halberd, and me. The room was cold. Boardroom lights bright as interrogation bulbs, projector humming like it knew what was coming. Arcadium's quarterly update had been scrubbed. This wasn't strategy. This was triage, an emergency board meeting called within 12 hours of the latest compliance notice. Everyone showed, suit still creased from the dry cleaner, eyes bloodshot. The only person missing was me, and I was the reason they were all there. Legal took the floor. No intro, no throat clearing, just a click. The first slide read, "Compliance failure countdown, 9 business days remaining. Not days. Business days." Someone whispered, "Jesus." The lead attorney clicked again. "External meeting request. Competitive transition, Halberd Systems." Murmurs turned into full-on side glances. One board member looked like he was about to stand up and walk out. Another click. The final slide wasn't even theirs. It was a scanned copy of a formal statement from the Department of Defense liaison. On the header, the federal seal. Underneath it, a single sentence. "We will not recognize any Arcadium deliverables unless the original system architect is retained, or a clause-compliant custodial transition is executed. No wiggle room, no asterisk, no room for charm or spin." Lawrence Hale leaned forward slowly, his hands pressed together like he was trying to keep them from shaking. Then he turned to his son. "Did you just hand over our core?" Darren opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw worked like he was trying to chew his way out of a sinking ship. But there was nothing to say, because this wasn't about PR anymore. It wasn't about optics or quarterly performance. It was about the systems, the ones I had built, protected, encoded with guardrails and ethical tripwires they never understood. The ones that wouldn't function without authorship and custodial succession. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I understood what a mistake looked like at scale. And Arcadium? They had just made one worth millions. The DoD's message was surgical. They didn't threaten. They didn't raise their voice. They simply declared the deliverables null. Just like that, all of Arcadium's active defense projects were frozen in limbo. Their internal teams couldn't validate transfers. Their external partners couldn't deploy. Worse still, Halberd Systems hadn't even spoken publicly. The request for a competitive transition meeting had been quiet, off the record. But board members knew what that meant. Halberd wasn't circling. They were replacing. The CFO leaned back in his chair like he'd just lost all blood flow to his legs. "Without Reyes," he said quietly, "we don't have Tier 4. It's not just about contracts. It's federal architecture. Her credentials aren't optional. They're coded into the framework." The general counsel added, barely above a whisper, "Every override we've attempted is logged. One more and we trigger a full audit." Lawrence didn't speak again. He didn't have to, because the center of gravity had shifted, and I hadn't lifted a finger. I hadn't sent a single email. I hadn't spoken to a reporter. I'd simply walked out, badge on the table, claws left behind. And everything that followed, they triggered themselves. I didn't burn the system. I just took the sun with me. Weeks passed like the closing credits of a movie no one wanted to admit they'd been starring in. Halberd Systems didn't issue a press release. They didn't need to. A quiet update to their executive team directory did the job. Chief Systems Officer, Special Projects, A. Reyes. No spotlight, no victory lap, just a new name on a foundation already in motion. We launched our first joint framework within the month. Clean, on time, fully clause compliant. My signature was the last line on the compliance log, the kind of signature federal liaisons recognize without needing introductions. No one questioned the rollout. No one delayed funding. The trust traveled with me. Meanwhile, Arcadium bled from 100 self-inflicted cuts. Vendors pulled out. Stalled milestones defaulted. A quiet line item in a federal procurement document simply read, "Deliverables rejected due to architect void." They couldn't even argue it. Clause 12C wasn't interpretive. It wasn't vague. It was printed in bold, signed in blue ink, and housed in every system certification they had. And now it was working exactly as designed. By the end of the quarter, Arcadium's primary defense contract was reassigned. The same board members who sat through Darren's slide presentation watched the new compliance documentation roll in, with my name at the bottom. Darren resigned with a hollow LinkedIn post about new opportunities in innovative markets. The comments were quiet. The likes were mostly bots. The real industry knew. They always do. Lawrence Hale gave a single statement to investors. Critical leadership errors were made. That was it. No names, no timeline, just enough air to acknowledge the implosion without stoking more fire. No one dared ask what came next, because everyone knew what had already happened. I didn't retaliate. I rotated. I moved to a team that read the fine print before touching the wiring. A place that understood security wasn't just about who had access, it was about who wrote the access. A place where my name wasn't an afterthought, it was the beginning of the blueprint. Arcadium didn't fall because of sabotage. They collapsed under the weight of a clause they had in plain sight, filed, indexed, and notarized, but they never thought I'd use it, and I didn't need to yell to make it heard.